7 Nigerian startups that have announced they will be shutting down operations this year will cost investors $79.15 million in funding deals. The country has witnessed an unprecedented shutdown of startups in 2023 as about 8 exited the tech ecosystem, citing operational difficulties. Now, 7 of the startups are responsible for the $79.15 million funding that investors would not be making any returns from. Now, among the startups tracked are Lazerpay, which raised $1.1 million, 54Gene, $45 million, Pillow, $21 million, Vibra, $6 million, Bundle, $450,000, PayDay, $3 million, and Pivo Africa, $2.6 million. I'll be joined by Ola Atose, the CEO of KoinKoin Exchange, to explore and further talk about this. Thank you, Ola Atose, for joining me this morning.
Yes, very good morning to you, and thank you for having me.
Well, as much as I wouldn't like to sound this way, but it seems we're in a season of shutdowns. Now, on the one hand, 5 companies are exiting Nigeria within the past 10 months. That's the regular companies. And on this divide, we're seeing 8 companies that are shutting down in the tech ecosystem. How worrisome do you think this is?
Well, I wouldn't say it's too much cause for worry. There are a lot of entrepreneurs in Nigeria. And of course, you know, the zeal to create is as strong as ever. Yes, we have noticed, again, a number of the companies you mentioned. Some are actually pivoting to other businesses. Some are changing, there's been some sort of shareholder-led changes, from one business model to another. So what I'd like to say first and foremost for startups in Nigeria, it's not all doom and gloom. But one thing that we are seeing, to be realistic, is in the startup scene, there are a lot of companies which are either doing something similar. The tech scene around payments, for example, around digital assets, if you like, is flooded with a lot of newcomers. And of course, the more competition you get, there'll be some winners and, of course, some losers. So I think that's really what we're seeing. But from an investor perspective, the opportunities are, still there in Nigeria. There are a number of problems, a myriad of issues which still need to be solved, especially in the payment arena, in the foreign exchange arena, if you like. And I think that, there are a number of startups like ourselves, who are working very hard day in and day out, using existing technologies, marrying them with new technologies to find a way to solve basic problems. And one of the points I'd like to make is that for founders like myself and entrepreneurs, it's important that we focus on, the one thing, the one problem, what is it that you do that solves issues, that brings value to your investors. I think that's a question that all founders and entrepreneurs should be able to answer, before, raising money, so to speak.
Ola, let me come in here. Let me come in here. I like what you have said. I mean, the fact that the first thing should be providing solutions, answering questions, making things work and all of that. That should be priority before we start talking about raising money. Is it that you're admitting that there could be some, maybe some rush to go get some money, to go raise funds? Is that what you're trying to say here? I see that you're already talking about some of the issues or some of the factors that could be responsible for what we're seeing in the tech ecosystem. You've talked about competition, but I want to take you on this second one.
Yeah, I think, depending on the experience of the entrepreneur or the founder, people tend to think, and I'm not entirely wrong in saying this, you don't always have to go out hunting for money. You can start small on your own as a founder and scale up, right? That's what we chose to do. It's a slower burn. It takes longer. But, you're not in that situation where you've taken money from investors and you're under pressure to sort of deliver almost instantly. There is wisdom in starting slow. Now, a lot of, founders have different methods. We all have different experiences from different walks of life. I myself was an investment banker for many years before sort of coming into the startup scene. I bring a lot of experience and a wealth of experience into my business, and that's been very beneficial, for KoinKoin. But again, a lot of others, yes, there is a, abundance to sort of go into I need to raise money phase, as opposed to focusing on, the actual solution that you're bringing and what problem you're solving.
Let's focus a little more.
And I think people tend to get carried away.
All right, let's focus a little more on this funding thing, because, it was one of the things I planned to talk to you about, and I'm glad that you've started it. So talking about this funding issue, what should be the model? What should be the right way it should be done? Is there a sort of feeling like you just want it to be in the news that, oh, you raised so amount during seed funding, or you were able to raise this? What exactly is the issue with this funding? Why does it feel like everybody wants to go raise some money? Why? I want to believe the ecosystem, you have people who sort of talk to one another and all of that, and these things being discussed when you have your confabs or you have your summits and all of that. Let's really talk about this funding thing.
Well, funding is it's a double-edged sword, right? So if you raise some money, it means you have money to run your business, right? You're a startup, you need money to pay staff, to buy products, whatever the case may be. That's what you need the money for, right? For marketing and a number of other things. So that's why you say founders tend to look for investors who like their idea and are willing to fund it. So that's number one. But then the problem with that is, you get funding, how long is that funding going to last, right? So this is, the question we all have to ask. And there are obstacles along the way, right? As a founder, you may, have a projection of how much you may need for a certain period of time. And then, of course, that changes, and then something else changes. So the ability to become profitable, I think, is key. I think founders, are not necessarily business men. And in some cases, founders have a really good idea, but they don't necessarily make, the best CEOs. And again, this boils down to experience. This boils down to knowledge of product. It boils down to knowledge of the market. It boils down to knowledge of corporate structure, how to put things together, how to build a company, and not just be about the idea, or as is the case with the fintech, be about the technology. There's a need to have a general understanding on how business is run. And one of the advices I typically give to other founders, or the advice I take myself, is, what problem are you trying to solve? How do you solve the problem now with the little money you may have, right? And how are you being profitable, right? Those are the questions you have to answer. If you can answer those questions and begin small, then there's room for an investor to sort of see what you've been able to achieve, and then become a part of your business, as opposed to sort of, having a great idea on paper and then seeking funding, because that's not the reality. The reality only happens when you begin spending money, when you begin, spending, again, investor money, as opposed to your money. And again, the real crux of it all is when you make profit, right? No matter how small it is, you've solved the problem, you brought value to the system, and you've made some profits. That's the way to look at it. If you could do that first before raising money, then you're on to a winner.
Well, thank you for that thought. Well, let's look at the tech ecosystem. Now, you've talked about, I like how we started with, these founders in themselves, how that they need to take care to ensure that certain things are put in place, whether it's the business model, whether it's the problem they're solving, whether it's all of those things. Fantastic. But now, looking at the tech ecosystem, are there challenges that are probably peculiar to this, to that sector that maybe the government needs to address?
So one of the issues, I think, in the tech sector, if you want to talk about payments specifically, if you want to talk about digital assets, maybe, is the need for regulation in the space, right? So what is the direction we want to go to with some of the newer technologies? The blockchain-driven ledger technology, which has been very popular, the advent of what we call digital assets, or some others call cryptocurrencies, for example. The need for regulation in that space, the need for there to be some sort of understanding and parallel thinking by those in government, the regulatory bodies, and those in the private sector, so they can find a way to work together. So whatever value can be brought can be, benefit can be for everyone. And as far as Nigeria is concerned, the benefit can be for the whole country. So I think at the moment there's some lopsidedness to, yes, there's some benefit to some of these technologies, but how is the private sector getting those benefits to the people? And is there some sort of, understanding, education that has gone in, not just for the consumers of these products, but also for those who regulate, the entire landscape, whether it's, fintech, whether it's payments, whether it's foreign exchange, or what have you. There has to be some sort of understanding. These understandings, if there is some sort of uniformity between, again, the private and public sector, then there's a better chance for us to solve even greater issues. For example, the dwindling naira, the valuation of the naira, which is obviously dropping, depreciating by the day. There are ways we can solve that problem, right? But there's a need for both private and public sector to come together, for there to be some regulatory oversight and some education for the public generally, so we can all benefit from the solutions. So in my view, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Some of that work is on the public side, on the side of the government, of course, and those of us in the private sector also need to take heed to ensure that where regulations are available, we get those, we become regulated, we get the licenses that are available, and we make sure that whatever we're offering is within the, the strict laws or whatever regulations exist. We're operating within that pyramid, within those parameters, and we're able to, again, provide the value to the general public, but at the same time, from an investor perspective, make sure that we can offer, good value, even more value, as opposed to sort of going out there to seek funding and then looking to apply a solution where there is no oversight, either by the regulatory bodies or any government body.
All right, we'll come to the Startup Act, which of course we know is into motion already in Nigeria. It's in motion rather already in Nigeria. But we know Nigeria is a big market, and one would ordinarily expect that, any good product we sell in this particular country called Nigeria. But then again, we see a situation where these startups are probably, for one reason or the other, closing shop. And I'm wondering if any audit has sort of been conducted to find out what exact challenges are. It's a good thing you've mentioned what some of these things could be. I mean, I'm looking at, is it possible that there is financial impropriety? Is it possible that there is a lack of technical know-how? Is it possible that, some of these other things are actually happening, and how do we address them head on?
Yeah, so I think with each company and some of the startups which have, unfortunately folded, as you mentioned earlier on, they all have unique cases, and it's difficult to speak to any of them without more information. But there are some, core tenets which I think are important for every founder or any CEO in terms of running a business. One of those core tenets is corporate structure. There has to be an understanding of, what the company is doing, what the structure of the company is, who's running the company, who's in charge of the money. If you have a treasury of your company, your ingoings, your outgoings and your incoming, there has to be an understanding of how all that's run. And it's not as easy as just saying, I have this idea, I want money. Yes, that is what a lot of startups do. And a lot of the ideas are great, even till today, right? But if the company itself doesn't follow some of the very basics in terms of, how to ensure, overspending, how to ensure you're not overhiring, how to ensure that you're in the right place and you're solving a problem which actually exists, as opposed to, pivoting to something or trying to do too many things at the same time, which is always the case with some startups. It's always good to sort of have that laser focus on the one thing and making sure that your corporate structure, the structure of your company, your outgoings, your expenses are all tailored to solving the problem you've set out to solve. In that way, you don't overspend. That way you don't find yourself in a situation where you're running out of money, your runway gets shorter and shorter, and you're unable to take off. So again, there are a lot of basic tenets for founders and CEOs alike to follow in terms of running their business. But I still think, back to basics. What problem are you solving? What can you do to ensure, things as you mentioned, like, financial propriety doesn't happen? Who's in charge of your money? Do you have an experienced CFO on board? These are also the questions that have to be asked before you actually set out to raise money and before you begin running your company. So I think these are sort of key points.
All right, let's look at that Startup Act that I talked about. Among other things, the Act seeks to establish a startup investment seed fund, which is required to have a minimum of 10 billion naira annually. That's towards financing labeled startups, and of course others as seed funds, grants or loans. Now it also includes maybe talk about trainings and tax and fiscal, some other things really, is fiscal incentives and all of that. So how far do you think these things will go in repositioning the sector?
Well, of course, it's all well and fair for there to be funds available for startups, and I think the entrepreneurial spirit in Nigeria is alive and well. There's so much that entrepreneurs bring to the table in terms of what they've been able to achieve, the amount of companies which are going up, the sort of amount of money which has been raised is a testament to how well the startup scene in Nigeria is doing. But at the same time, as mentioned earlier, I think it's pertinent that there are some ground rules, for who gets funding, and of course, I think we founders, CEOs have to challenge ourselves to sort of do our best, to keep the responsibility of running our companies on ourselves as opposed to depending on shareholder funds, right? So, but that's just my personal view.
All right. Well, in the last decade, we see that the Nigerian startup ecosystem has actually dominated the African, startup ecosystem. And with some of the stories coming out of Nigeria, my worry is, what do we know that is happening? I mean, is this a picture, a representation, or a shadow of what is happening across Africa? And if that is the issue, how can Africa then, address this issue? Maybe as a continent, what can be done?
I mean, there are different, there are different sectors, right, that we can look at to try and answer that question. So one of the companies you mentioned earlier is 54 Gene. 54 Gene obviously being a biotech company focused on genomics with a view of making sure that the larger pharmaceutical companies around the world take into consideration the genomics of Africans, which happens to be the most diverse part of Africa, of the world, if you like, in terms of genomics. It's a very good idea. The basis of which the company was set up is, in my humble opinion, one of the better ideas, in a very long time, and I still think something will come of it. But in the light of COVID, 54 Gene was central to that. They went out and hired a lot of people and had to spend so much money to sort of help with that sort of COVID, the COVID testing in that time. Obviously, that then grounded to a halt. The questions, we still swing back to the original question: what problem are you solving, right? And what's the value to the company if that problem is solved, right? So it's very difficult sometimes where you have a really good idea, whether it's in Nigeria, in Kenya, or South Africa. It's a problem which can help, a lot of us in the African continent. But then, you have no way of scaling, right? Or your method of scaling doesn't work because there's no infrastructure or there's no understanding, within the continent on how we can scale on some of these basic ideas, right? So that's a problem. So these are things you have to take into consideration even before you start off your business. So one of the things we like to do in our business as KoinKoin is we have a bite-sized approach. Our ultimate intention is to solve, monetary issues across the African continent. And one of the reasons why we say borderless Africa, borderless world is we hope that at some point, and we're sure this will happen at some point, that the future of money will bring.
All right, Ola, just before we end this conversation, let me come in here. Just before we end this conversation, I feel we'll be doing a disservice to these investors if we do not talk about what their fates are. I mean, what happens to these investors? They have invested so much into these businesses, and for some reason, these businesses are shutting down. What is the fate of the investors?
Well, in some cases, the investors, been able to sort of get their funds out before the shutdown or wind down of some of these companies actually happened. And then in other cases, the companies have pivoted, right? So they've literally changed from one business model to another. So the investor funds are actually safe, so that does happen. Now, yes, there are some cases where it's unfortunate and the shutdown happens, but none of the cases, again, the companies you've mentioned earlier, they're not necessarily related, and it's not always down to competition. My view is investors need to take a harder look at the problems that we're trying to solve, especially in Nigeria, right, and the continent, obviously. Look at the problems that we're trying to solve. Look to see if there's some level of support, from the public sector. And then, of course, look to see how the founder or the company themselves have actually gone out to address that issue before investing. That's the advice I'd give to investors. That said, with those who have either lost funds, they shouldn't be discouraged. Africa is the final frontier, and Nigeria is the tip of the spear. And I think the opportunities to invest in Nigeria, they're huge.
Okay.
And I would advise investors to keep a hard look keep on looking at Nigeria, and of course, stay focused on, helping solve some of those issues. And again, I would put my own money in solving problems which are obvious. One of the problems I mentioned earlier is how we solve the foreign exchange issue, in Nigeria. And that's something that KoinKoin is doing a lot of work on right now. So,
all right, Atose, I think I need to stop you right here. There's a whole lot to say, I know, and you're passionate about the subject matter, but we have to leave it here. Thank you so much, Ola, for your time on Business Edge today.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll bring you international headlines. Stay with us.